Change suggestions are still wanted, please, for Desire As or linking into Desire As by Prefab Sprout. That was Thin Air by Teenage Fan Club. And we welcome now to the show, always a pleasure, Sid Griffin.
Hey, Stuart, how are you doing?
I'm good. I understand you've had to fight your way through a phalanx of autograph hunters at the door.
Well, one.
Well, it's a start, Sid.
It's a start. And I said to the guy, Stuart, I said this quite honestly. I said, do you know who I am? And he pulled out the Cole Porter's No. 6 album, and I signed it. And he said, would you put please to Gary? And I said, I would be honored. So I'm chuffed, because normally, the last time I was on this show, Shirley Bassey came out, and of course it was just a mob scene. It was just like something out of 1947 in Hollywood, and fair enough.
Of course.
But I mean, I got my one guy, and I'll take old Gary. Well done, Gary. Thanks.
No, absolutely.
And I got the photograph to prove it.
I think often I think that a cult following is better than just a mass appeal, isn't it? More discerning, yeah.
I don't want to be recognized I'm biting into a burrito. It's too awkward.
Well, another Gary's been in touch here, Sid. As usual, I'm very much looking forward to hearing Sid Griffin. He's never less than thoroughly informative and entertaining. Also, please tell him how much I enjoyed his gig at Rough Trade East on Tuesday with the Cole Porters. The first time I've seen them, but it won't be the last.
Good.
There you go.
It was a gas at Rough Trade East, thanks to Ben Monahan and his staff. They're lovely people.
Gary then adds, although, or rather in the middle of his email, he puts, and I also know virtually nothing about the Bangles, so I'll be educated to boot. Well, you've come to the right place, Gary and Chibnall.
Yeah.
So the Bangles, Sid, new compilation out. Set this in some kind of context with us.
It's very, very early days. There's no in L.A. for this whole Paisley underground scene, which has to be said because it's such a big deal here. I'm asked about it weekly.
Right.
And it's very early days, around 1981, I think it was. I was working at Gem Records, which is J-E-M. It stood for Jim, Ed, and Marty. And they were these three guys that got together at Princeton and Rutgers in New Jersey and were importing British LPs that were unavailable in the United States, like the Who's Direct Hits.
Right.
And within a decade or so, they'd had this fantastic company that was coining it in. They had an office on the East Coast near their New Jersey start, and they had an office in L.A. where I was working. And we were, along with our competitors at places like Green World, we were the hip indie foreign vinyl distributors. So if the big labels didn't care about little indie records. So one day, a band I'd seen as the Colors and as the Fans before they became the Bangles, they said there's some girls coming down and they're going to bring in their single, their first ever single. It's on their own label called Down Kitty Records.
Okay.
And we want you and Bob say, check them out and all this other stuff. So the Bangles came in. It was Debbie Peterson, my dear friend, and Vicky, her sister, and Susanna Hoffs. Mm-hmm. So they came in, and they were just incredibly, I knew them, but not well. And they came in, and they were just so full of... Churchill once described FDR as being like a freshly uncorked bottle of champagne, and that's how I would describe these three women. They came in, it's dull, a day job, and I would be on the phone. It was like Glengarry Glen Ross. It was in a room, and you're trying to get people to buy 50 copies of a vinyl 12-inch from the UK, and it's boring.
Yeah.
And they came in, they were just like a freshly opened bottle of champagne. They were so bubbly and so much fun, and we played the record. It was getting out of hand, backed with Call on Me, and they were the Bangs then, I should say.
Yeah,
it was great. I couldn't believe it. It was energetic. It was very Californian.
Yeah,
but it wasn't just the usual Birds or surf guitar thing. It had a lot of that, but it had this whole Mamas and Papas meets punk kind of garage aesthetic, and nobody was doing that. I mean, Stuart. Nobody. And so it was unique, and it was just a fresh sound, taking some old ingredients and putting them into a fresh sound, and I was blown away. And I remember talking to them that day about, I thought the name Bangs, which means fringe in the United States, was kind of silly, and I, for my sins, told them they should change their name to the She Bangs, as if we're having a big shebang. That was not my best idea.
No.
And they later morphed, of course, into the Bangles. But at the time, they were the Bangs, and they had no permanent bass player. I think Vicky played bass on the first thing, and then they met this wonderful young lady named Annette Zelinskis from a free supermarket giveaway that had musician ads a go-go, which is how I met Stephen McCarthy of the Long Ryders. And they started doing these gigs, and they... Early on, like all of us, they were a little rough around the edges, but they had, like the first time I saw, say, Dwight Yoakam, the first time I saw the Bangs, as they were then, they had fairy dust sprinkled on them. Right. I mean, the Petersons and Susanna, they really had fairy dust sprinkled on them. And for whatever rough edges that band had, I knew in my heart of hearts if they just kept at it, something would happen. Did I realize they'd be as big in America and indeed in Europe as they became? No, Stuart, I didn't. But I like when I saw Dwight Yoakam the first time, I thought this unless there's some sort of ego or drinking drugs gets involved, heaven forbid, they're going to happen. Something's going to happen. They were good.
Great. So this would be the very first stuff as the Bangs, with it getting out of hand.
Yeah, and it had a very it had a black and white sort of cut and paste Xerox photocopied cover, very primitive thing. And I think it was a folding cover that was then in a plastic bag, as a lot of the punk indie people had done since '76. Very sort of relatively primitive cover, but it was really promising, and it stood out. It was. While the pieces of it, Stuart, were of something I sort of could identify in rock's past, no one had put them together like that. Yeah. And they were just so great. And I started going to gigs from Dot, and I'm sure I've seen the Colors, the Fans, the Bangles, the Bangs. Oh, I don't know, 25, 30 times easily in my tenure out in California, easily. And they were worth it. They were value for money.
Getting out of hand by the Bangs, as they were then. That was on their own label then, Sid.
Yeah, it was on their own label. I don't know what else, if anything, came out on it. And what kind of set them apart early on, besides the fact that they had this original sound made up of old pieces, was they had this charisma, and the vocals were just unbelievable, because most of the punk bands or new wave bands or whatever, the vocals weren't that important, and harmonies were really cool with the Bangs. And also, other than the Go-Go's and Castration Squad and a few a few charming bands like that, there wasn't enough. I didn't feel there. I thought it was a male-dominated presence, and they were just so fresh and different. And then the weird thing was, not weird, but in at the time they started writing these really good songs. I mean, I'm looking at the credits here. Vicki Peterson wrote "Getting Out of Hand" all by her lonesome, and "The Flip Callin' Me" was equally as good. That was Vicki with Susanna Hoffs and David Roback, whom I remember from the Rain Parade. But of course, your listeners here will know David Roback. That's the same guy that was in Mazzy Star.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the beginning of the Paisley Underground, because everybody knew everybody else. I mean, from where I lived, sharing a house with one of the Bangles roadies, Joe Stell, and with Debbie Peterson, I could walk to Green on Red, Rain Parade, Dwight Yoakam, so many people's homes.
Yeah.
Matt Groening, that did The Simpsons, he was just a short walk away, and he was a cartoonist at the time.
Yeah.
Who knew he'd be the leader of The Simpsons and Futurama? But their songwriting got really great, and then when they went out on a tour with I heard Ranking Roger on Chris Evans this morning. They went out on a tour with the English Beat, is what they were called in the United States. They couldn't be the Beat because there was Paul Collins Beat. So they went out with the English Beat, and they came back, and the live show was just so much tighter and better and groovier. And they were, which is sort of a hard thing to do for anybody on stage, they were really attractive and really kind of sexy without being sort of cheap or superficial in any way. And it sounds like something a sports agent would say, but the Bangs, now it's morphing into the Bangles, had the whole package. There was really what's not to like time. Yeah.
And what you said there about the female presence in like the house, also, I think quite early on, I was just looking at some stuff earlier, I think they appealed to girls as well, didn't they? Women came to the gigs.
Yeah. I mean, there were other acts like Alice Bag of the Bags and then Exene of X, but I mean, there weren't that many all-girl bands that were really kicking it, and the Bangles were just kicking it. I mean, they were a really good kind of garage rock band. It's kind of what they've kind of morphed back into now. When I saw them the last time in London, they did their hits properly, and they did their hits that sound like their hits, but they just did some kick-ass sort of garage stuff, and it was just beautiful. And it was really something, and I think, and particularly in this country, if you read Viv Albertine's book, sometimes men are so surprised that a woman has this sort of kick-ass, powerful, emotive sound that's not based on a sort of Ladies of the Canyon vibe, that's based on electricity and a 4/4 beat. And the Bangles had that with melody. I mean, come on, that is a formula for success.
How quickly did it happen for them, Sid? And what was your reaction when it did?
Pretty quickly. When they came back from that English Beat tour, and they got signed to Columbia Records. I remember Chris Lamson, one of their road managers, and me talking. He says that they've got it. It's really starting to happen. And the first album came out, and well, actually, the first EP came out. I think you're going to play a track from it in a minute. And then Prince got involved in the album after that, and it was just fantastic. But it was obvious. I mean, sometimes, for instance, the very, very, very first REM gig I researched for Q years ago, Q Magazine, and I found out it was a roaring success. The very, very, very first one. Some acts have fairy dust sprinkled on them, and the Bangles did. There was just a magic in them that if you'd taken one person away, you never quite get it back. I mean, when Cheap Trick started fooling around with having different bass players, they never quite got it back. They even got the original guy back to play bass, and it was never quite the same thing. And when Annette left, and I am the one that encouraged Mickey Steele to apply for the job.
Right.
And I wouldn't say I got her in the band, but I said, you got to apply for this job. This band's going to happen. I mean, it was she kept it going, and she became a nice, slotted right in really well. Yeah. And that first EP that came out on Faulty, I remember Faulty Records was run by the Copeland brothers of Police fame and Sting and all that monkey business. And at one point, they closed the label and concentrated on their label IRS Records. So this first Bangles EP that you're going to play a track from, Stuart, was out of print for a while. And I went in Bleecker Bob's, and it'd only been out of print for a few months, and it was obviously going to be reissued at some time, and it was already for $50 at Bleecker Bob's. And this is 34 years ago that went out of print, and it was already at $50. That was a lot of money back then.
Tell you what, Sid, we'll come back and chat a little more and say goodbye, and we'll conclude in a moment. Well, let's hear the tune right now, Mary Street. Tell us about this.
Mary Street was a song off of this EP I was just telling you about that was on for $50 at Bleecker Bob's. And what the thing that I remember about it is the EP came out, and I thought it was great, really good. I wish they'd done a whole album. And I was living in a house with Joe Stella, their roadie. Debbie Peterson had a room. Sometimes Eric Burden and the Animals was there. I know that's name dropping, but it's true, because he couldn't get back to his home in the desert. And he would just stay in Hollywood with us. Sometimes Billy Bremner, not the Leeds United guy, but the guy from Rockpile was with us for weeks on end, my dear friend Billy Bremner, and it was like a real rock and roll house. And this kid showed up one day, or did he deliver it to Debbie, and had a Mary Street sign that somewhere in America, he'd climbed up on some foam pole or metal pole. I don't know how he got it down. And the thing was like, you got to see it in a car, so it's got to be pretty big while you're driving at 30 miles an hour.
Absolutely.
So this thing, Stuart, was white with black trim with Mary Street in black, and it was filthy. It had bird poop on it, and the kid had obviously shimmied up the pole or gotten a ladder, done something. Why he wasn't arrested? How easy could it be to take down a street sign? And he presented it to Debbie, and we somehow had it. And what do you do with something that's like 3.5 feet long and say 2 feet or 18 inches tall that says Mary Street? So we just stuck it on the mantelpiece because we had nothing else above the fireplace, which you never used in L.A. anyway.
No.
And I've often wondered, what happened to the Mary Street sign?
Well, if you know, let us know while we're listening to Mary Street. That's Mary Street by the Bangles from their first EP. The first EP on Faulty. That was the Copeland's label, wasn't it? Yeah. Great. Well, just a fantastic sounding thing. And then you are still. It's lovely to say you clearly are still in touch with them.
Yeah, I'm still in touch with them. And if they're not listening now, I'll be a monkey's uncle. I love Debbie. I love Vicky. I don't see Sue except when they played in London.
Yeah.
And Mickey's hard to track down, but I'm hoping I got my message through to Mickey to listen.
Yeah.
They're terrific people. And one reason I've been so effusive and effervescent right here, they were very happy times, I think, for us all. Just, you don't get your youth back, and at least mine was well spent, and I pray theirs was well spent. I was in their good company a lot of times, and there were a lot of laughs back then, and, you had some sort of, I don't know what, late, heartache, and, but it was just fantastic times, and it was so wonderful to be part of a scene where everyone was doing well at that time. Now, I knew in my heart of hearts only one or two bands would get through, if any. But I thought the Bangles deserved everything they got. I love seeing them when they play again. I think their records, because they had so many hit singles in America, I think that gave them, in some sort of male rock critic eyes, an air of superficiality, because you're a singles band.
Oh yeah, rock critics, what are they?
Well, Creedence Clearwater Revival were a singles band.
Yeah, absolutely. So were the Beatles.
And so were the Beatles. And I just think, anyway, they're still making records. I love Doll Revolution. They had one out about a couple of years ago. I mean, they're still real. They just got it. Some people do, some people do.
Has there ever been a decent compilation of the Paisley Underground?
Funny enough, I know somebody that's working on it now.
Well, I was going to say, because you're the man to do it.
You're talking to him.
Oh, well, there you go, Sid.
We're working on it right now. Steve Hammonds, how's that a plug?
Well, I was just going to say, because for people who don't know and for people who do know and loved it, I suppose a roundup of that scene will be long overdue. And you're the man to do it. Well, come along and tell us when we're nearer the time, Sid.
Yep, working on it right now.
Great.
I kid you not.
Great. That phrase about like a freshly opened bottle of champagne is a beautiful phrase, too. I shall be using that myself.
Yeah, man. It's Churchill's. It's not Griffin's.
It's Churchill. It's not... Oh, that's... Well, so it's a big man who can credit someone else, particularly if it's Churchill. And you're playing a few solo dates in Italy next month, yeah?
I am.
Great.
And then the Long Ryders on the East Coast of the United States in November for some shows. And I know I've got friends in New York and Boston listening, so I hope to see you all.
And then Sid's solo on the 24th of November at the Wanstead Tap in London. All of this info about one of the greatest men in show business, Sid Griffin, is at sidgriffin.com. Lovely to speak to you, Sid.
Stuart, it's a gas being on your show. All the best, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.